Hello, dear students. By now, if your school has chosen this book as the prescribed novel for the GCE Ordinary Level English Literature examination, I think you're in the right place, in the right channel, right? So, what I'm going to do is just briefly introduce you to this novel as well as going to close read the entire 13 chapters for you in a much more comprehensive, much more easy to understand way with kind of interpretations, right? And just making this dense text paraphrasing, in other words, just making this dense text or kind of poetic language into much more comprehensible, much more graspable, much more familiar day-to-day English. So you'll kind of enjoy it while I'm doing this. So if you are a complete novice, in other words, if you are a complete beginner who have no idea what's inside this, you have recently gone to the shop, right, a bookshop, and probably bought this book and very fascinated by these colors, right, vivid colors, and have no clue, no idea what's inside this text, right, I strongly recommend you continue with this introduction. But if you know, I mean, like if your school has started some chapters, right, you can carry on appropriately with the corresponding chapter where I do the close reading, right? Because it will be divided by chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 until chapter 30. So you can just, jump into the appropriate chapter and carry on as you wish, right? So anyway, if you are a beginner, I think I'll try to make things a little bit interesting to you. So you see, this is written by an author called R.K. Narayan. By now you know he's an Indian, right? He's an Indian author. So what's the significance of R.K. Narayan if someone asked him, in case like, why are we studying this book in the first place? Like, is it the only author in India? I mean, like, how many authors are there in India? So why this book? So anyway, who has selected this text, right? Uh, Among these three uh, prescribed books has a idea about post-colonial literature, right? I mean, like we will not go into much detail about post-colonial literature, those things. But to make simple, like R.K. Narayan is a very important figure in Indian English literature. So he pioneered. I mean, like he's a one stalwart or one big shot, right? What I would call, but how I introduce this guy to my students in my school is just like say, hey, this is a big guy, he's a big shot in Indian literature, right? He started in writing in English and he introduced this fashion into English literature, right? Not he's not the only guy, right? We can't just forget Rabindranath Tagore from the picture, who is Koyali fitting that requirement. Then we have like some other authors, right? Uh, like Raja Rao. Then we have Rajanand, right? Those candidates are the pioneers who started writing in English and almost created a trend, right? They are the fathers, forefathers of, I would say, Salman Rushdie nowadays, right? Or Bhagat, Chetan Bhagat, right? Who are just like immense, big characters in today's India literature, right? Not to forget Arundhati Roy on the other side, right? Or Kiran Desai, or Anita Desai, that duo, right? Uh, so it's a fascinating thing, right? I mean, like Indian literature has always inspired us. We are in the periphery, Indian periphery. In other words, like what I would say is like we can't forget Indian literature. I mean, like our culture is inspired by Indian elements, and our literature too is inspired by Indian elements. So I'll not go into much details because that's not a grade appropriate, right? So it's not expected from you to go or travel into that kind of a depth. So basically, I told you R.K. Narayan is an important Indian figure, right? So that's why he's here. That's why we're going to study him. So above all, if you read the last page, right? before jumping into any chapter, I always encourage my students just to read the introduction, just to read the back flap, just to read the, like the introduction, what it says. Like it gives a kind of a hint, it gives kind of enjoyment, and as well as a clue into what we are up to, right? So the last book flap, okay, I forgot something. Why is these books are so colorful? With the covers are so vivid, right? And we have some interesting, we call these blurbs, right? In novels, authors or publishers write blurbs. Blurbs are some kind of a interesting lines that grabs the attention, because when you go to a bookstore today, you find like in a novel, in a fiction area, you find like, not in I mean like in a developed country, right? If you go to a Barnes and Noble bookstore, probably 100,000 books of fiction will be in a shelf, okay, in that area of fiction. So how does a book stands or screams or speak loud to itself is always by interesting cover, right? And by interesting blur, as well as they just give us the awards or certain recommendations. Particularly, they just print out those are the things like speaks to the accomplishments of the books. In other words, it says like some other people have read this book on behalf of you and they have found it interesting, so they recommend it for us, right? So in this blurb, you see the master of Chekhovian irony. If you read this carefully, right? I always uh, encourage my students just to go through not to judge the book, not to judge the content by its cover. You can't judge a book by its cover, but still, always, when you see the recommendations, right? We can't help judging a book, right? Anyway, master of Chekhovian irony, Narayan's Malgudi is a metaphor, not of India but of the world, says the Washington Post. It's said by the Washington Post. Master of Chekhovian irony. What Chekhov are we talking? He's the author of Bear, and he's his master of Chekhovian irony. We all know, right? Anton Chekhov is the author with a knack for irony and a knack for sarcasm. He has a flair. His writing style is full of ironical, uh, ironical um, kind of dark humor. When we go into Bear, right? Or if you are just familiar with Cherry Orchard, things like that, right? So he's a great author, medical doctor by profession, but anyway. So just like he's like, in other words, an Indian Chekhov, right? And he's a master of this irony. In other words, R.K. Narayan has a very dark humor, a kind of dark sarcasm when he writes. He is able to make us laugh, right? At certain instances, where you'll find it for yourself. I'm going to close read those lines, right? You'll find it for yourself, and just like Anton Chekhov to Russia. And Narayan's Malgudi is a metaphor. What does it mean? Malgudi is a metaphor. So you should know most of R.K. Narayan's uh, novels are based on a imaginary town called Malgudi. In other words, if you go to India, you can't find a village or a town or a place called Malgudi, because where Malgudi originated is in R.K. Narayan's imagination, right? So he comes up with a imagined town, imagine place called Malgudi, where so many of his novels are placed. We call this setting. He has set his novels, right, in a place called imaginary town called Malgudi. The Malgudi days are very famous among children, right, among students like you, because it's there are like fascinating stories, as well as, right. We'll come to that later. He's the Washington Post introduced us as Malgudi is a very interesting place, a metaphor. You know it, what is a metaphor, right? Not of India, but of the world. So, and by the way, what is Washington Post? What is Washington Post? Right. Washington Post is an American daily newspaper. by that time, right? Still it exists. Most widely circulated newspapers published in the Washington D.C. That's why it's called the Washington Post, right? Just like for us, it's like the in Lanka, the kind of a daily newspaper, right? Where there's a wide readership, just like Sunday Observer, maybe, right? Sunday Times. It's when it comes to America, this is such a kind of a newspaper. Washington D.C. and was I mean, like this newspaper has this literary columns. Nowadays, it's like this. They have this. Uh, what you call it? I can't just recall the name right now. Not the Newsweek. New York Times, yes. New York Times bestsellers. I mean, like New York Times is a daily, is a newspaper, but they emphasize a lot on literature. So they have this listing, they have this rating called the New York Times. If New York in this rating, if the New York Times rating says this book sells this much, that will engender, that will generate much more readership. It's kind of an announcement to the other readers. Just like in the Opera Winfrey show, like Opera Winfrey is entertainment, like entertainment show, but still Opera has a book club, right? So that book club itself, when Opera introduces a book, uh, helps to sell. So if at that time of R.K. Narayan, right? So Washington Post has given him a blurb, have given him commended a lot. So that's basic kind of introduction, right? And now let's read what's in the smaller text. Uh, Jagan, the vendor of sweets, find himself confronted by his estranged son Mali. So we are going to know a character called Jagan. Actually, his name is Jagannath, but we'll call him Jagan. Some teachers prefer to call him Jagan. Doesn't matter, it's a name, right? So I prefer the name Jagan, so I'll stick with the name Jagan. Jagan is a vendor of sweets. He's a seller of I mean, like a vendor, a seller of sweets, sweetmeats, and find himself confronted by his estranged son Mali. So we'll find now another character called Mali, who is the son of Jagan, right? Who has returned to Malgudi with grace. In other words, the son has come to this town called Malgudi with grace. Now, when you come to the story, when I explain the story, you'll know what's going on. But this is kind of an introduction, right, to the complete beginner or complete new person who doesn't have any clue about this novel. When he's going to buy this novel, there says there's a character called Jagan who is a vendor who is selling sweets, and he has a son called Mali, and this Mali comes to this town with a wife called Grace. Yeah, we'll find out, right? And an American wife, this American lady, right? To this Indian town, fascinating. And a grand plan for selling stole writing machines. Okay, he comes to this Malgudi with a plan just to sell something. It's like market something called the stole writing machines. So what's this? You don't understand, right? It sounds like Greek for you at the moment. It sounds like Chinese for you at the moment. And I know, right? It doesn't matter. We'll come to know these things, but still, right? Since you don't know what's inside, we'll find out by these lines, right? What follows is a classic plus generational battle between father and son. So in this novel, the conflict is introduced, just to make a novel interesting or make a short story interesting, just to make a movie interesting, just to make a song interesting, we have to have a conflict. So a hint of a conflict or a fight between a father and son is introduced in the very blurb of this book, right? And what follows is a classic plus generational battle between father and son. A man of Gandhian principles, in other words, this Jagan, the father, is following Gandhian principles. You know who's Gandhi, right? We are calling him Mahatma Gandhi, who followed the non-violent principles in life just to fight his colonizers, who is the British, right? We'll cover that later. It's too much just to speak about those things right now, right? So we'll leave that aside. Man of Gandhian principles, Jagan cannot reconcile himself, means Jagan can't come to settle himself, or Jagan can't come to means, or just cannot focus himself to Mali's modern ways. So there's the conflict, there's the problem of this novel. It's like there's a tension, right? Sometimes you feel the same tension, right? You are young adults at this moment. Aren't you feeling the same tensions with your parents sometimes? You do, right? තාත්තක මල පයින්නවා හිටුණා, right? Now, same thing, right? But here it's in a different scale, in a different level. Not that your regular kind of a conflicts and your regular kind of arguments, maybe, right? Because I had same arguments when I was a child, right? When I was there, I had always arguments with my father, right? He hated me, right? So, but here, this hatred is kind of different because a different taste, right? So we'll find out them later. Jagan cannot reconcile himself to Mali's modern ways. Jagan hated Mali's modern ways. So we find a modern kind of posh son. We'll find out whether he's really posh or this is kind of a showing off poshness, right? At that time. So and father is kind of an old-fashioned father. He's like following Gandhian principles. So you can imagine, right? There's a problem, and he's coming to Malgudi, his town, with an American wife. Jesus Christ, right? Imagine that. Okay, we'll find out. But develop fondness for Grace. But finally, this father start to love this new wife, Grace, right? So I know you're impatient now just to know the story. What's going on, sir? Can you? Right, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Just like I'm just introducing stuff, right? Unable to find a place in the new world, Jagan decides to retire. So what happens in this story is, according to the blurb, if you put in the introduction here, is like Jagan feel little frustrated, little exhausted, little kind of a crestfallen, and he just leave this mundane life and he retreats, means go back, reconciles, right? He just kind of withdraws. It's like we are calling retiring, right? He's tired of these new ways of these sons. It's kind of too much for him, and only to return that Mali has been arrested at the police and has deserted his wife. So he's what's this? What does he say? Mali has been arrested. So it seems like Mali, the son, is going to be arrested at certain time in the novel, and he's deserted his wife, like he's ignored his or just left over his American wife. So not kind of interesting son, right? So we'll find out what's the story. It's a little bit a sneak peek, I would say. It's like peeping, right, a little bit into the content. What's up to like we are going to discover with the close reading. So it'll be interesting novel, I guess, right? Yeah, we'll find out. Insightful and moving. I mean, like there's a lot of insight in this. I mean, a lot of knowledge in this, a lot of enlightenment in this, like a lot of things that you can get into life from this novel. And moving means emotionally agitating, emotionally rousing, right? The Vendor Sweets by R.K. Narayan's story of an India trying to find its own identity. So at this time, it's like a struggle between a father, a man, right, of finding his identity. So that's basically a kind of introduction. That's what is in this text, right? So at this moment, if you are a complete beginner, if you don't understand anything, don't be scared, don't be nervous, right? Don't be frightened. I am here to help you line by line and take you entirely comfortably through the entire novel. So just stick with it, just follow it, right? If you find it complicated, just rewind this a few times, then you like, be familiar with this entire thing. And just another interesting thing is this introduction. Uh, and yeah, I'll tell a little bit, I'll read a little bit of it, right? Uh, R.K. Narayan was born in Madras in 1906 and educated there and at Maharaja's College in Mysore. So he was born, he was educated in a place called Mysore. It's a village, it's a town, right, in India. His first novel, Swami and Friends, 1935, was set in the enchanting fictional territory of Malgudi. So yeah, there you go. Malgudi is the place R.K. Narayan sets his novels, right? It's like, in Madurdu, whether Madurdu is actually existing, maybe it's existing, right? But whether it's fictional, doesn't matter. It's a place that Martin Wickramasinghe based his novel, right? Madurdu, some Avya Upadyanjina goes there, right? And so it's kind of a totally fictional, right? It's a kind of a totally constructed inside R.K. Narayan's imagination. In other words, if you go to find in a map, if you are trying to find Malgudi in a map, no, you don't find that, right? That place is not existing in a map. Yeah? But probably with all these characteristics, I can say definitely Malgudi is somewhere close to Tamil Nadu or Kerala, right? Because R.K. Narayan has strong links to Kerala, and this Tamil kind of culture is always evident in these characters, right? Even it's a Hindu, you find. I mean, like, there's another thing about India you should know. I mean, like, when it comes to India, India is not just a one single country, right? It's just like a in India, you find separate states. You find Kerala, you find Tamil Nadu, you find Goa, you find Uttar Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, right? There are so many, just like the United States, right? United States is not just a single country where there's like a concoction. It's like a combination. It's like a that's why we call it federal countries. I mean, like, they separate states has separate rules. So in here, even in India, separate. I mean, like, the behavior, the appearance, the way they talk, the way they engage, their personal appearances are a little different from province to province, right? I mean, like, if you find a person from Kerala and just compare him to person from New Delhi, you can definitely find the differences, because I have just associated these people in a certain time of my life. So even I could just like predict, or I could just assume a kind of a gross predicting of their characteristics, right? So anyway, so now that's why I told this Malgudi, even it's an imaginary town, has this kind of a connection to this Malabari, or just kind of Kerala uh, cultural whatever ties. Said that. Fictional territory Malgudi, Narayan's other novels, The Bachelor of Arts. So there you go. There's a list, right? And another thing, if my memory is correct, R.K. Narayan was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in Literature, somewhere close to like 20 times. But unfortunately, he didn't receive the Nobel Prize, which is the highest prize in English I mean, like, in world literature. Uh, so anyway, I mean, like, despite that, he has been receiving so many other awards, right? He's squarely he's famous. In other words, these words are hits among Indian readers, right? Swami and Friends, Malgudi Days, people loved it. That's why he's famous, right? I mean, like, he's a big shot. Don't forget that in Indian literature scene, early Indian literature scene, he's a it's a rock star, in other words, right? So yeah, the English teacher, Mr. Sampath, financial expert, waiting for Mahatma, the Sahitya Academy Award winning, the guide. Yeah, there's another award he has won, Sahitya Academy Award winner, right? Man Eater of Malgudi, which is a tiger. A Vendor of Sweets in 1967 is published, and the painter of signs, and a tiger of Malgudi, talkative man, the world of Nagaraj. In other words, he has written lots. We call this kind of a writer a prolific writer. I mean, like, he writes a lot means he's a prolific writer. So some authors are not prolific writers. For example, if you take a person like Franz Kafka, or forget Franz Kafka, we'll take like a Nobel Award winning author like Albert Camus. Very few, just like lesser than the fingers of a hand. He has his works, right? But they are dense. They are just like philosophically challenging at that time where he lived. So they were considered this masterworks, right? All right. Anyway, so some authors are prolific. They write a lot of novels. They publish a lot. But there are some authors at the same time doesn't write much, write very little, but still that's very strong stuff, right? So in this case, we find R.K. Narayan in the other side of the scale where we consider a prolific writer. He has written a lot. And another thing is, okay. You can read this thing, right, and find out something very interesting. In 1980, R.K. Narayan was awarded the A.C. Benson Medal by the Royal Society of Literature and was made an honorary member of the American Academy Institute of Arts and Letters in 1989. He was made a member of the Rajya Sabha, and in 2000, the government of India conferred on him the Padma Vibhushan, kind of a highest kind of a literary award Indian can give is like Padma Shri and Padma Vibhushan. So Padma Vibhushan is offered to R.K. Narayan. So he's loved, he's respected in India. R.K. Narayan died in May 2001. He just passed away, right? So he left his legacy. He's still alive, even he passed away. That's the good thing about being author. You become immortal as long as the people loves what you write, as long as people cherish what you write. I mean, like, you are not dying. Even you are physically gone, right? I mean, like, you have a secondary life, what we call the eternal life, and that's the best thing of being an artist, right? All great artists are immortal in a sense. So that's it. And there's something I want to strongly say. Like most of the novels, R.K. Narayan's novels are semi-autobiographical. What do you mean by semi-autobiographical? What do you mean by autobiographical? Autobiographical is like he drives his inspiration from real life experience. In other words, R.K. Narayan was a teacher at a certain time. Then he just gave up teaching, right? And he was a bachelor of arts, which is an arts degree, right? I'm a bachelor of arts too, right, from a foreign university, and I mean, like, that's the basic qualification of being a literature teacher or just an English language teacher, right? Or I mean, like, when it comes to humanities, right? It's one of the basic credentials. So he got it. Then what he happened to him is like he left his teaching job and just full time he engaged on writing and just pursuing his passion of just writing. And you find those passions inside this book. You find some of R.K. Narayan's real life experiences. It's like, at a certain point, his wife dies of typhoid, which is kind of a severe fever. And he lost his wife, and he was struggling with those things. Those kind of semi-autobiographical references can be found in like the English teacher, which I have taught for my Cambridge students somewhere back, like 3-4 years back. It was the prescribed novel for the Cambridge literature students 2010 syllabus, which changed every 2 years, right? So I mean, like, so what I want to say is, like, some of his personal experiences are inside his book. I mean, like, he has taken facts from his real life and put them into fiction, and find those truths. I mean, like, put those things, put those experience into certain characters. So it's kind of a semi. It's not totally autobiographical. It's semi. It means like it's halfly, or little bit of his personal experience are shared by these characters, and you find those in this novel when you close read this. So this is kind of a basic introduction for you. I mean, like, so if you still find it little hard, just you still find it clueless, it still sound like Chinese or Greek or Latin to you, right? Don't be afraid. I'm here. I'm a very friendly teacher, right? I always because I have done this many times, right? I mean, like, in my school, I mean, like, I know when it comes to Cambridge literature, or local literature, advanced level literature, or in Cambridge English 1, 1, 2, 3, what are the weak points, or what are the places students most need help. So I'll be trying to assist you entirely through this novel. So just follow up, and just make sure you subscribe to the channel, right? And so that's the introduction. So we'll start. The show time will start. I mean, like, we'll rock and roll from the chapter 1 itself, right? So stick with it. Take care.